Hi everyone, welcome to our Worried About Nothing podcast today. We decided to talk about communication today because it seems to have been a day full of it, so we thought it was apt. I think communication is obviously so important. It's how we interact with others, and it can be so loaded with so many things. You know, not only words, meaning behind it, the language, but the energy and the thought and the reactions it all brings up in people. It can sometimes be an extremely loaded thing. But I think all of us studying with Aratima and being on the path of wanting to clear all of this are really trying to work through all the quirks and other things that can kind of come up in us, you know, all the things that trigger us with regard to communication. Because ideally, one of the things that she teaches and one of the things that I'm really trying so hard to do more and more in my own life is to communicate from that place of truth. And it's a place where it comes from the heart, it's loving, and it's open. I think all too often communication you can close down. It's very easy to do because as soon as something triggers you, or as soon as something hurts you, or as soon as you feel something you might not want to, you close. The heart closes, or the mind closes, or you just close generally. And I think the art these days and the ideal is to be able to communicate with everything open, the heart open, speaking from truth, and meeting on that level, which is so much easier to say than do. Doing it is difficult. Saying it is very, very easy. I just did.
Yes, that's for sure. And I know Aratima is a very good trigger. I remember recently on one of the calls I was bringing up my physical issues, pains, or how I was feeling, that I was feeling off or something like that. And I was so stuck in that experience. And then usually she's trying to be really nice and work around it. And I think she noticed that it was like 2 or 3 phone calls where I was talking about similar things. And she decided that it was time to cut it. Mm-hmm. And then she basically said, well, remember who you are, remember who's feeling all of this. And, you know, are you really feeling it, basically? And it was such a big slap at my ego. And of course, I felt hurt and I wanted to hide away in my safe spot and stay there. Of course, I didn't say anything, and then the great awareness came in, and I felt like, yeah, she's just reminding who I am, and who I am has nothing to do with this experiences. Who is really being hurt? Is it me or is it my ego? And then you can feel that I start opening up again, and I was like, yeah, I know what she's talking about. She's just pointing us back to the divine, to that who we truly are. But it definitely hurts in the moment. Like whenever somebody's pinching you, it hurts. Like you just want to hide away. You're just like, what? I don't like this. Hey, I don't want to be here. I don't want to hear that. And of course, there's other reactions like shame. Oh, I've just been told that I'm in my ego. Oh, everyone else heard it too.
They'll know.
Exactly. I have nothing to do with that. I'm not my ego. What are you talking about? But it does hurt. That's all I can say. And just working with that understanding that this is not who I am.
But it is a blessing, though, when we get those slaps sometimes. You know, I think, like we were talking earlier about us getting together to do these podcasts, in a way, it's such a blessing to have the opportunity to be triggered and to clear our stuff. I'm very carefully didn't swear there. And to just move through all the things that hold us back as humans, all the programming, all the childhood stuff, all the whatever it might be, and just step into this brave new world courageously. Because stepping into the unfamiliar is scary always, you know, because that's why we stay in the familiar memories and the old patterns and all of that, because we know them so well, they're comfortable. It's like an old pair of shoes or a duvet or something, you know, but stepping out of it and being naked, metaphorically speaking, or physically if you want to, but, you know, kind of being unshielded is really scary, very scary place to be. But it's the only place from which you can reap more benefits, the benefits of having your egos crushed, being able to grow and extend and expand out, and break away from patterns and being able to see them as a gift as well, because so often we don't see them. I mean, I know, I'm speaking for myself, I'm guilty of so many that I'm still completely enmeshed in. So the gift of somebody pointing that out, being able to see that is really, it is a gift. I mean, the gift is a good word for it. It's such a precious thing to have somebody honestly tell you something and tell you from love. You know, it's a very different thing, somebody communicating from a place of wanting to slap you down or put you down or make you feel bad in any way, to somebody wanting to tell you something because they see it, they love you, and they want to help you. And that's that open expansiveness of, oh, yes, thank you. That's amazing, because that can change your life. And I think it's also very connected to politeness, you know, the whole communication thing. And I don't want to be the kind of person that goes through life communicating politely and safely and carefully, because that's just restrictive. I mean, it's like I'm going to record this really short little podcast. I've written it up already, where I talk about this truth, speaking truth and politeness being very connected, in that it's just very much a limitation of freedom of speech, and it's self-censoring. And anything that self-censors is essentially stopping you from being yourself. So communicating, learning the art, and I think it is an art, of communicating openly, truthfully, yet lovingly from the heart, is such a powerful place to be. And to meet somebody, you know, to meet another person in that place, because that's where the growth happens. That's where the miracle zone is. That's where all the expansion happens, you know. And I feel that with these podcasts, it's such an amazing opportunity for us all to meet in that place and help each other kind of get through the communication snags or the communication limitations that we have. Or the, you know, for example, one of mine is speaking my truth honestly, or disagreeing with somebody who I care about. I find it very difficult. So being able to meet you both in this space and be able to try and do that in a loving way, even though I'll do it really badly at first, and I'm sorry, forgive me if it comes out really clumsily, but just being able to have the opportunity to do that, it's very powerful, because that's what we all need to do, really, is just drop these limitations and these self-imposed restrictions on who we think we should be and how we should speak to people and what is right in inverted commas.
Yes, it's a good place to be, although I found that even with one of my work colleagues, we were always good friends. I remember we went out for a run, and she's very much a fire element, and her second element is an earth element. And I remember jokingly saying something that doesn't offend me, and I didn't think it would offend her, but she actually thought that it was sort of discrimination, I guess, at work. Because it was actually pointed out by my colleague, because when she wrote something, one of my colleagues that she wrote it, the other colleague that is a fire element, I don't want to put the names there, she responded differently because she understood meaning differently. And the colleague who wrote it came in and said, I don't know if it's to do because English is not her native language. And then I said, well, English is not my native language. And they understood it exactly like my colleague did, who's the fire element. So it started from there. And then we had another miscommunication. And I kind of joked about it, saying, well, maybe it's because English is not our native language. And it's really offended her. And she was really she felt I was discriminating her and things like that. But I was just saying the truth. I mean, what's wrong with saying that it's not our native language? Because it is the truth. In no way I was trying, but maybe it wasn't the right way to say. So anyway, sometimes I really have to be careful, because I don't want to offend her. I don't want to feel her bad. If it's not something I might care about, some people do. I mean, if somebody doesn't work with their egos and they're not interested in processing it, well, then they won't understand me. Then they won't understand the place I'm coming from. They don't even understand how is it possible that it's not even hurting me. They just can't understand it. So I think it's good to speak your truth. But as you said before, also meet people at where they are at and still be a bit more careful with how you say things.
Yes, I think I agree. But also I feel that you don't want to overly censor yourself because of other people's stuff that might rise up in them. Like with the situation with your colleague, saying that it's not your native language is a very inoffensive sentence in itself. It's not like you're telling her she's fat and ugly or something. So what she's attached to that is her stuff. So yes, of course, you don't want to intentionally say things to hurt her feelings, but if you feel that you need to censor yourself to the point where you can't even say something like the sky is blue today because she might be colorist or something, then that's very restrictive on you, and it's too much of a censoring yourself, I feel. Because some people are very, very sensitive, and I know I'm sensitive, I'm very sensitive, so I can relate to that. But at the same time, I guess I'm fortunate in that I'm on this course and I'm on this path where I'm learning how to deal with all of this as it comes up. But even if I wasn't, it's kind of like, well, even if I'm overly sensitive, it's not my place to blame somebody, especially if it's something innocuous, like it's not our first language.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like you were saying that, Ratima had said to you about not worrying or not caring as much about speaking your truth or about being polite. Because it feels like a lot of the time with communication, when there's an over concern with other people's feelings, obviously you want to be considerate of other people's feelings, but if you're thinking more about their feelings than about what's true for you, there's almost a disconnect, because there's ways and ways to say things. So, you can say the truth in different ways, but using that phrase, it's not our first language. There's not a way you can say that more neutrally, really,
Yeah.
But I understand what you mean, though.
It feels more like an observation, that statement, than any sort of accusation. But like Kim said, it's probably something that she had attached to it from before. Maybe she had other experiences in the past where English not being her native language was a really bad thing or something.
Yes, she had an experience where she was bullied back at school and she always had to defend herself. So that's why she felt like there was some discrimination at work because of her experiences in childhood.
That's not really, I don't know her at all, but to me, that's not really a valid argument, in that, I could say that I was bullied because my feet are too small. And then if somebody at work said, oh, your feet are really small, I would then go to HR and say, this person just discriminated against me. It doesn't, it's your personal stuff. Discrimination in the office is, if you're sexist or racist or, actually saying you can't do your job or whatever it is, So I understand it's difficult because you're colleagues and you get on well and everything, but she sounds like maybe it's her stuff that's coming up that she's not dealing with as she might.
Yeah.
It's funny, even though with your example, Kim, with the small feet thing, I could definitely see someone still going to HR for that. It's like people flip out over the smallest thing. They're because they feel offended in some way, then they're right in feeling offended, so they're gonna go do something about it, even if it's I don't know. A lot of people just don't want to own their own stuff.
Yeah, and I think sometimes PC-ness and all of that is a good thing to an extent, but sometimes it can be taken to extremes where everything is taken seriously. So for example, if somebody goes to an HR manager and says, my colleague told me my feet are too small, I'm really upset about this, I want them to be disciplined, the HR person is almost obliged to take them seriously. And going back to communication, it can sometimes sway the other way as well. So some things that are really in essence very innocuous become PC loaded because people take offense to them, or people think that you can't just make a comment, let's say, about the weather or something, because somebody will be offended about something. Sometimes it's kind of like, well, that's really sexist that you think the clouds are white or whatever it is.
It's lovely day, it's so nice and sunny out, and someone's offended because they don't like nice weather. They prefer clouds. No, I do know people who prefer clouds, which is totally fine. That's awesome for them. They can go enjoy living in places that I would never want to live. But to me, that's the same thing. It's really you're going to be upset that someone's happy that it's nice out because you don't like nice weather. I don't know.
Yeah, but I also start talking a little bit about elements, and I did find that sometimes it is good to take that into consideration. because I did notice that, for example, if we have two fire elements, there is definitely a lot of competition in the team. And there's definitely, you don't even see it, they don't even realize it, but unconsciously they always come up with new change because they want to show the manager what they're doing. And they sort of compete against each other and just trying to keep sending something new, a new change, because they want to improve it, but it's coming from the place of competitiveness. That's what actually myself and my colleague found. And that was a little bit harder for us because none of us were not fire elements, and she's a nurse and I'm water. So we were kind of, and when there was changes every week, we were struggling to cope because we couldn't even implement the first change. And then there was a new change coming up next week or the next day. And there was just so many changes that we were struggling to remember what was done because, you know, these people, they just, it's their nature, and I totally understand them. There's no blaming in that. They just strive on seeing the result. They strive on seeing changes, and that's how they feel being really accomplished. But it's really harder for other people. So I think taking into account the nature and what element you are, I feel it's also kind of important when you communicate with somebody, because what's really important for one person may be taken differently, you know, if you're different element and you struggle so much with change, for example.
That's true, yeah. I mean, it is good to take into account how different people are and the different meanings they put on things. You know, whether it's not necessarily meanings, but whether it's, you know, the elements that they are, or there was a book by somebody I read a few years ago called The Languages of Love, or The Love Languages, something like that. And it talked about how different people see or receive love in different ways. And again, that's a form of communication. So I can't remember off the top of my head all of the ways, but it was things like acts of service was one. So if you did something for a person to help them, they felt loved. Another one was gifts. So if you gave them a gift, they'd know that you loved them. You know, there's different kinds like that. So I think it is important to take into account people's language in whatever form it takes, you know, whether it's the elements or this language, that language. But at the same time, I do still think and stand by the fact that while being considerate of all of that and thinking of other people, if you're not feeling that you can say what you want to say in a thoughtful way, then that's very damaging to yourself. And I'm speaking of as somebody who in some ways is quite outspoken, but in other ways, I've spent a lot of time in my life not saying things. And I know the toll that that's had on my life in the situations where, like I said earlier, telling somebody that I care about that I disagree with them and why, I find it almost impossible. It's very, very difficult for me. Whereas telling a complete stranger is fine. But somebody that I care about, I don't want to hurt their feelings, or I don't want to cause conflict or any of that stuff. But what my next step is, or what I need to do, is learn how to do that in a loving way that they can also hear, but that also means that I'm communicating what I need to communicate. So it's finding that balance to an extent, I think. You know, so going back to your colleague, for example, with the, this is not my first language comment. I mean, it's very difficult with that one actually to find a different way of saying it. Yeah, it's a very bad example. I can't think of another way to say it.
And this is something for me to work on too, because sometimes, again, with my upbringings and with my culture, there's really no filter, and sometimes I just say things as they come up, and what I actually mean sometimes doesn't come out right, because sometimes I actually think of one thing and then something just, you know, like a trash coming out of my mouth, and that can really offend other people. So it's good to be aware of that too, even though I do want to speak my truth, but how I speak it and how can I meet people at their level so it's pleasant experience for everyone. Might be not very, very pleasant, but at least, you know, it doesn't feel like, you know, there is a lot of hurt or discrimination for that matter.
But I find it refreshing, and I don't know whether it's because of the upbringing I had with a Polish mother who spoke her mind, but I find that people that say what they think, though there might be that shock to the ego, that shock to what your belief system about yourself is, it's a very valuable thing, because so often, I mean, I'm very good at this, not noticing or seeing what I'm like at all, So if people provide me feedback about something I'm doing that, say, offends them or hurts them or something like that, I may well have no idea about it. So if somebody has enough love to do that to me lovingly and tell me, it is such a gift, because otherwise you can go through life sometimes doing something or behaving in ways that are constantly offending people or constantly hurting people, and you just have no idea because nobody's ever told you.
Well, it has to be said from a place of truth, right? From that person. Otherwise, it's not going to be well received, likely by me or maybe by you, because then you could tell like that there's other things attached to it. Like it's not a emotion of love. Or if that person's not coming from a place of truth or love, then I don't know, is it really helpful for you then to take that and turn it against yourself? You know what I mean? So I definitely think it's a gift, but it has to be coming from that place.
Yeah. But sometimes I do agree with you, absolutely. I think that's the way that it keeps, if it's heart to heart, absolutely, that's the most valuable way. But sometimes even I found when it's not from a place of love, it can be valuable, because it might be something like sometimes, we wear our weaknesses like on our sleeves, sometimes we're unaware of it, but it's so obvious to others that this is something we have a hang up about, or this is something that we may be sensitive about. I mean, speaking for myself, I used to wear loads on my sleeves, hopefully less now. But sometimes people will go for the jugular because they'll see that weakness in you or that sensitivity in you, and they'll go for it. And they'll say something that's so painful. But it can be a really good opportunity sometimes to look at it and have to look at that weakness because somebody's pointed it out. And like Katya said earlier, everyone knows, everyone sees it. And it's such a good opportunity sometimes to be able to look at it really honestly and go, actually, no, that's not true. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's not a pleasant way of learning something. But I've had a couple of occasions in my life where people have said things that have been so painful and so horrible. I've received them as being so horrible. But it gave me the opportunity to look at them and go, no, actually, they're not telling the truth. And that is not me. And I can drop that story because it's not true. And that's valuable in a way as well. It's the harder way, but I found that very powerful.
That's interesting to me because I feel like when something triggers pain for me, then that's because part of what they're saying must be true. Like that's always kind of how I took it. But I know people say mean things that aren't true, but I don't know, maybe I just don't find that to be as painful. It's just kind of like, because you can kind of know. You're like, yeah, all right, I know they're like, that's not true.
It can be something that you believe is true, even though it's not true. So let's say, for example, if you had an eating disorder and I said, Danielle, you're really fat, which you're obviously not. But, if you believed it, it would be so painful to you that I was seeing this weakness, this flaw that you're trying to hide, even though it's not true, clearly not true.
Makes sense.
That's interesting.
And I would think that those things that you really care about and try to hide would hurt you the most.
Because everyone sees it. Everyone knows your secret.
Exactly.
Well, I don't think that it's a conscious hiding most of the time.
I don't think it is.
For me, at least. I was like...
No, I think it's pretty much always subconscious, I'd imagine, or most of the time subconscious, yeah. Which is why it's more painful. Because especially if it's subconscious as opposed to unconscious, you're kind of semi-aware of it, but you're not really. And then somebody points it out, and oh, there it is, bubbling up to the surface. And you've been aware of it, but not really. And now you have to look at it, and oh my God, everyone else can see it too. And it's, traumatizing.
Right. Because I think some of the stuff that gets shoved down into like the subconscious area is put there because it's so painful to deal with to begin with. So then if someone says something that touches on it, it's like you have to go revisit that pain that you didn't want to deal with to begin with. I mean, it is good and it's a gift, like you said, and the fact that that pain is showing itself again so that you can be aware of it and make it conscious, so it's not hanging out in your subconscious and like running along in the background. But it can be really shocking, I guess, because since it is in the subconscious, when someone says something, just to be like, kind of feel hit with that pain and be like, oh my God, where is this coming from? Like, why does this hurt so much?
Mm-hmm. There can be decades of pain that kind of suddenly crash over you instead of just the one stab, as it were. Yeah.
And then when it comes up, because you piled it up for such a long time, it usually comes up like a snowball, and you really have to feel it. And it's even more painful than when you were shuffling it in that place. I remember a recent example, again, on the phone call with Aratima, I mentioned about headache. And she said, hey, it was back in Scotland where you were. Something happened there. And I remember with my ex-partner, whenever it felt like we're going to have an argument, I would just shovel it right into that subconscious, because I didn't want to feel it, nor did I want to have an argument. I would try to go away, and then I would give myself a headache. And I didn't like the headache either, so I would shovel it right in there, try to kind of escape from boss. And when it came in, it was definitely for a couple of days, I just had to feel it. I just had to feel all of it.
Did you have to feel the headache too?
Yes,
Oh,
the
God.
headache, yes. Yes, I was asking, why is all this headache? What am I doing? Am I thinking too much? What is this? And she's like, no, it's just coming up, something you have to experience and let it go through, because until you really experience it, you'll never move forward, because everything out there for you is to experience it, no matter how painful it is. That's what I find.
Yeah, the short pain of the immediate experience is so much better than the built-up decades of pain that can come out later. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, Kim, I know where you had some profound experience during the last retreat. Did it really hurt you when Aratima was talking to you? Did you feel like it was a knife right in your heart? How did it feel?
Yes and no. It was there was an awareness that what I was doing and the way I was reacting was completely irrational and nonsensical and victim-y and ridiculous, but I still also felt the pain of it. Mm-hmm. So the mind knew and could see, but it was a wave, the tsunami wave was so strong that the knowing was underneath all that. But I think it was a really good, it was such a profound experience, and it was a really good way of just being in that pain, and especially in the physical setup that we had, in that I was sitting in front of the group, literally in front of the whole group, and everyone could literally see me. Yeah, it was very powerful. So it was just feeling the waves of shame and guilt and self-loathing and all the things I'd buried down, like you were both saying, in the subconscious, so I couldn't feel them. It was like this huge wave of all of that came up. And it was important that happened, because otherwise I was never going to face it. I would have just pushed it down again. If I'd just felt a tiny bit and pushed it down again, it would have stayed there. But as it was, it just all came up really strongly. And I thought at one point that I was going to pass out, and I wanted to run out the room screaming and all of these things that, the fight or flight or whatever the ego likes to do. But instead, all of it came up. And like we were talking about earlier, being in that space of being able to honestly communicate. I wasn't communicating in words, but I was communicating with emotion and allowing it all to come up and feeling the communication back from all of you. It was just so important to have that space and to allow. It's not that I was allowing myself, I didn't have a choice. Well, I did have a choice, but to allow, for example, crying in front of the group, which I never do, and then later crying in front of Jason, I never cry in front of men, was a powerful release as well. And I think going back to what we were saying about the communicating, I think it's so important to have that space that you can do this in, or have that person you can do this with, because things need to come up. Like you said, they need to come up, and it's easier for it to come up if you have the safe space for it all to come up, rather than because it's dragged out of you by somebody who really wants to hurt you.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know if you wanted to try what Jason suggested, and we can ask, since you're a seer.
Yeah.
Are you seeing anything? Other than with your physical eyes and you being dark on the screen?
Yeah, we can try. What would you like me to look at?
I don't know. I guess maybe just what, if anything's coming to you as far as how this conversation is going, like what, I don't know, do you feel like, just what do you see, I guess, with all of this conversation? Has anything been coming up as we've been speaking?
Well, I feel with this conversation, what I see and feel, sometimes it's kind of like a seeing feeling, not just a seeing, is there some unraveling that's happening. And the conversation started earlier in the day, not just through Messenger, but just the feeling of it, the energy of it. And it feels like we are unraveling some tight blocks and kind of opening some like secret hidden compartments where we've kind of hidden things away from people for a long, long, long time. And there's a kind of, it's like almost like an energy of new roots or new shoots coming out of reaching out and connecting and wanting to be open about things that maybe we haven't been open about before. And visually, it's like there's some unraveling happening around all of us. So unraveling around the heart, especially some around the throat. And it feels and looks like there's like a bubble that's forming around us that we haven't necessarily had before, in that we've, when we started doing this podcast, I think we always got on well, we loved each other, we cared about each other, but it feels and looks like there's more of a solidarity that's building, an actual space that we are creating together that will allow us to reach and stay in that level of honesty. I think that's so important. And I think I feel that we all feel it, because we all want to grow and develop. We all want to get rid of our stuff. We all want to carry on with the Ratima's course. And it looks like we're building that more visually. And I was laughing earlier because it kind of feels like, in some ways, this is Jason's course that we're on. We're kind of Ratima Wisdom Life. This is Jason's course. And it's got a different energy and it's got a different, dynamic to it. But there's that kind of, I think it looks like there's more light there as well. There's more clarity. There's more of an expansion as well that we're seeing or feeling. We're coming into more cohesion, it looks like to me. And how that resonates. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, with the unraveling and their blocks being uncovered, stuff like that, I definitely agree with that. I can feel that too. I feel more of a sense of solidness, so I can agree with that. I felt within myself still like a strong resistance to expand. And I think it's just more programming. I don't think that I know that, but it's just like another thing that needs to be faced, like more layers of emotions and different types of pain that need to be moved through to allow for that unfolding, which it's definitely been happening. You know what I mean? And it's been interesting because I don't know, I've been experiencing a lot of this stuff coming up recently. I know we got a lot of things going on in the collective and everything too, but it all seems very connected to this. And this might just be a good avenue to unearth the thought structures, because you know how the emotions, they build on the belief system. So where I've been experiencing a lot of the emotions and a lot of desires to disengage, it's like a lot of the real stories haven't been apparent to me. But I think that this has been an avenue to make more of those stories conscious, so I can actually work with them a little bit more deeply, because it's really difficult when it's just the emotions, but their structure isn't becoming conscious, I guess.
Yeah. And what I wanted to say, when Kim, you were talking about two different courses, the word that came up to me is Jason course is all about being sharp. That's the word that really came up to me. But what I do feel that, and I don't want this word to be misunderstood, but in a way that we are more intimate with each other, that we're really more open, and we're really trying to speak up instead of just hiding it away and just say, yeah, let's do it this way, let's do it, yeah, it's wonderful. But we're really expressing what we feel, how we feel, what we think, what's coming up, feeling, sensations, thoughts, all of that, which I think is great. It's good not to it's good to let it all flow and then see what's really bothering each of us and work with that.
Yeah. And being able to do it honestly. Because I feel that whatever is triggered in each of us, it's very core stuff. And so we feel it more. But being able to do that in a space honestly is very important. And it's very valuable and it's very rare as well.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful to dig deeper into things, because when you have situations with people who aren't doing this type of work, then you kind of have to keep it all in your head to a certain extent, right? You're doing all of that work on your own. You're like, well, is it my projection? What are they really feeling? You kind of have to figure it all out on your own. But in us having interactions with each other, we can have that space to actually speak with one another and digging deeper and say, like, well, what did you mean when you said this? And like kind of figure out a little bit more, I guess, where the true blocks are. Like, what's the projections and what's really like the issue? I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, makes total sense. Yeah, finding the true blocks, not just the excuses that sometimes, we'll put on top of our blocks. It's kind of like the nice covering on top of the block. So it's kind of, instead of feeling inadequate, it could be, oh, people don't like me because I'm too loud, or whatever it is, because that's less painful, or that's just a bad example. But it's being able to dig down to what's really the core issue. And also having the working or being close. I'm not talking well today at all. Being in a situation where I'm able to be with two people who are insightful and have vision and can see things and want to see things to be helpful is great. Because I sometimes in the outside world, in inverted commas, either people see what they see their projection on you and they blame you for it, or sometimes you can kind of be around people who are in the sort of the love and light community, as it were, and there can be a real sort of, oh, I want to read you, I'm going to read you, I'm going to tell you it's this and this, but it's not about you. Whereas being in this situation where I'm with two people who have cleared enough crap to be able to see more clearly than that, and to be able to see to the root of something is very, is a blessing as well. And I think we all do that. I mean, again, there's no accident. We're all working together through intention. We were put together through intention. It wasn't an accident. And all our stuff will trigger everyone else's stuff. And we're just perfect balance in that, and that there's going to be conflict. There's going to be this. And sometimes conflict is an amazing form of communication, in that it's like fire. It burns everything. And what's left is the ashes, or what's left is the truth, after all the dross is gone. So that can sometimes be very powerful as well, rather than the nicey approach of somebody telling you something gently and sweetly. If you have that banging heads moment where you have to see it, you can't not see it because the stars are in front of your eyes, and all of that can be very valuable too. I mean, there's different ways, obviously.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think sometimes we talked about the emotional reaction that comes with it, and that's the difficult part of the head bashing approach, if I could say. But it helps to make things a little bit more clear, if you can get past it, because when someone tries to tell you something nicely, sometimes it's just not going to get through. I don't know, I just see it all the time at work. It's like, blanket statements. Okay, well, this is what we've been seeing happening, and then because you're not being direct with like the people who are actually doing whatever it is, then nothing really changes, because everyone just assumes the way they've been doing it is okay.
And sometimes the gentle approach, going back to what we were saying earlier about trying not to hurt people's feelings, one way that sometimes people will say things is, well, sometimes what we do is this, and you're going, who, we, you, me, who, what? And what do you mean sometimes you do this, and what does that mean? So for those of us who aren't so quick on picking up those cues like me, the direct approach can sometimes be really, really, really appreciated.
Yeah, it could be good, but it can also turn into constantly pointing fingers at each other.
Yeah.
And mostly like blaming. So it's good not to go into blaming game too. That's what I've seen at work. Just, doing this, so you've done this, which is good. But at the same time, it's also teamwork. So sometimes when you approach it to the team, then everyone, well, should think about it and should work on it too, instead of just, just finger pointing. That's what I found too.
Right. And I think that makes sense, because if you're going to go into like a meeting, right, how do you expect to get anything productive done if you're like yelling at everybody, right? You didn't do this, you didn't do that. Yeah, everyone's really going to want to work with you and, be productive after that. I don't think so. But coming together with the thought that you want whatever project that you're working on to be successful, or in our cases, like we want to move forward in life and, I don't know, just like improve our own conditions kind of, then it's like if we approach it from that angle or that lens, knowing that we're supporting each other and trying to move forward in that type of way, I think that that's helpful as a starting point. So instead of coming in, like with that blame, like you didn't do this, you didn't do that sort of thing, it's more of I'm noticing this, you can tell me if that like resonates with you sort of thing, which I think that we've been pretty good at doing for the most part in the way that things are being brought up.
But it's interesting, this topic of conversation, right? Because that's what I feel, that's what conversations are in most of the places in the West. People are just really trying to hide away the pattern and really cover up them with politeness. And it's really hard to get anywhere, because you can't, in many cases, if you try to say what you think, how you feel, it's not always taking the right way because you're considered being rude, right? So it is important to speak your truth, but it definitely has some reactions from people.
But I think also taking into account that as you do more energy work and more light work, you are going to be transmitting and emitting light, so there may well be an increase in conflict from other people, because the less light they hold, the more they're going to be defensive or react to the light that you are sharing. And also the way that light can sometimes be transmitted can be with truth or words that will smack people. Looking at Jason is an amazing example of that. Sometimes he'll say things and it's like you get a smack in the face because your ego has just been beaten up, and that's a brilliant thing. It's such I keep saying gift, but it is such a gift. And I think sometimes when you go out into the workplace or into everyday life and you're mingling with people who haven't done any of this kind of work, their energy or their vibration is likely to maybe be lower than yours. And as you're speaking, it's not necessarily that you're offending them, it's that they're reacting to the light that you are radiating. Mm-hmm. So going back again, I keep fixating on this comment, about it not being your first language. The thing that I felt as you were saying that is that your colleague was reacting to the fact angrily that you're fine with it not being your first language. How dare you? So she's going to take offense to that. Mm-hmm. So it's not your fault at all. It's not your problem at all that you're okay and you've not got an issue with the fact that English is not your first language. Mm-hmm. So in a way, trying to overly compensate for people's feelings can be really dimming your light down, which is a disservice to you and to the world, because the world needs the light, as much light as possible, really.
No, I can totally resonate with what you're saying. And I remember on one of the retreats, I was really craving Aratima's attention. I wanted her to tell me, what is my pattern? Can you tell me so I can work on it? And she wouldn't say a thing. She would just say that I was trying to be really smart and pulling out the information out of her. And I was trying to be really creative because I would find different ways to talk about, just to extract that information out of her. And I didn't see it that way. So I would always ask some questions and they would not even relate to that. I would try to go around, which is really like, I'm really impressed with my ego, how it can do it, trying to extract that piece of information. So she wouldn't give me any information. It was kind of interesting. She wouldn't give me what my ego wanted. And after the retreat, I felt like I was being fully crushed, like somebody ran over me. So it just shows that you don't need words. Somebody can crush you without even talking to you, without even saying much to you. That's a perfect example.
She's a genius at doing that, absolutely. I think one thing that we need to do, especially as, being fourth year students, having studied with her, I mean, I'm not so much me, I'm terrible, but with you two, is to really...
You're terrible. I love how you always say it. Oh, no. I'm so slow at getting it. Oh, I'm like a snail. Oh, I'm terrible. Oh, I'm the worst student ever.
Right. I shouldn't even be in the course.
Exactly. I love all those phrases.
Yeah.
But that's like reverse ego, though, isn't it? I must stop doing that. Yeah, I've just noticed that.
No, that's still ego.
Exactly. It's reverse, though. It's, oh God, I'm being fakely humble.
Well, it must be the positive ego. That's what our Ratima told me. I was like, yeah, she still has positive ego and she needs to get rid of it.
Yeah, so communication, what else can we say about it?
I would love the word to be more honest, where we can say things and not react so much. And work with our own reactions instead of just projecting and just try to blame it on another person. Oh, this person is not nice, or this person said that. I think it would be a better place for all of us.
Yeah.
That's my ideal world.
Everyone just walking around speaking their truth.
But actually, it's changing in Russia. But at least when I grew up, there was a lot less censorship. People were definitely saying, and there was a lot more arguments for that matter. Like when we come, even when during family celebrations, there would be fights because people would just say things right in their face. Of course, they were not working with their egos, so they had to defend and fight and this and that. It was really exhausting, though. So I think you have to be careful what you wish for, because it could be a nice place, but if people are really not working on their patterns and they just say what they think and then they're being offended, then they fight and all of that. I remember I just hated it. I wanted to run away from all of that.
That's pretty intense. Yeah. But I think, again, it's something that can be generational in that, the way sometimes generations swap over. So some generations bring up their kids to be seen and not heard, and then the next one might be very liberal with their kids and what have you. And people that are my age that I know that have kids, quite a few of them are bringing their kids up to be more aware of who they are and to speak what they feel and to communicate. And so you are seeing this generation of young children growing up who will tell you what they want or tell you what they feel, and they don't seem to be so stunted by all these niceties. For example, when I grew up, my generation as children were supposed to be seen and not heard. So because of that, there was a stifling of communication immediately to an extent.
I think what you were trying to say, that people are supposed to be really quiet and just listen to everything that their parents say, don't really have a lot of their own opinion. I don't know if that's what you meant or maybe not.
In my generation, it was, yeah. But with some of the children that you see these days, I mean, it can sway, way in the other way, where they're kind of, they rule the roost, and they're kind of like, children are in charge. But you do see them even on the street. They want this or they want that, or I feel this, right? I'm, sensitive to this, or that upset me because, and they know why. All of these things, they connect all those dots that I didn't so much when I was younger.
Well, I never really had that kind of problem. I was always the one speaking up and not being afraid to speak up. And if I didn't like something, even with my cousin, I decided that it was a good idea to hit him, even though he was 5 years older than me. And I would come in the house and tell everyone, I'm the owner here. I remember my mother kicked me out of the house. I was like, okay, you're the owner. Okay, go live outside. I was back in the countryside house where we lived during the summer, and I was walking around. I was like, how dare they threw me away out of this house? I'm the owner. I'm in charge. I should be living here. Those childhood memories.
Wow, you were confident then as a small child.
But I think I was also given a lot of independence, so for that matter, my mom was working, and in many cases I had to do things for myself. So I think I had to be confident.
Thank you for listening to Worried About Nothing. This was our conversation on communication. Please let us know what you thought and what your thoughts are on communication in the comments below. Check out the links below. Kim's a seer, so we asked her to do a little seeing. That was our little segment there. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you soon.